Well, hi, Bruce. Thank you so much for helping with my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
Hi, my name is Bruce. I just turned 70. And so I grew up with the space race, with the trip to the moon. It was something that to me was just a part of my youth. And I always figured that by the time I was this age, I would have flown in space and maybe be living in space.
Well, I have a question I wanted to ask you then. Um, I have a sense that people back in the 60s and 70s had a more shared vision of what that future in space might look like than people of today. And I was wondering, uh, does your experience kind of agree with that, or
Oh,
what's your thoughts?
absolutely. Absolutely. First of all, when uh, Sputnik 1 went up, I was 7 years old. And I remember that my father, we went down to the school where I lived, where it was nice and dark. And we every day in the newspaper, they would have what time you could see it go overhead, just as a star against the sky. And we, uh, many nights, went down there to watch it, uh, and then just couldn't wait for people to fly in space. And of course, everybody was so disappointed that Yuri Gagarin became the first person to fly in space. And uh, when Alan Shepard went up on his 15-minute suborbital flight, yeah, it was everybody was excited. In fact, I remember in school, they had a couple of TVs, and the whole school watched the launch. But everyone was kind of disappointed that a 15-minute flight, and Yuri Gagarin has circled the Earth, and so everybody though was very much uh, focused when there was a launch. Everyone was so focused on it. John Glenn, remember, I don't know how many times uh, the launch was scrubbed before he went up, but everybody was on edge every time. And the more times the launch was scrubbed, the more people were interested and the more nervous everybody was. Uh, so yeah, and then of course it all culminated with Apollo 11. After that, interest seemed to fade a bit uh, until Apollo 13, which had just everybody in the world was riveted to would they make it back. Uh, but at the end of Apollo, certainly people just what happened after that, Skylab and then Apollo Soyuz and then the space shuttle, it just wasn't the riveting thing that it was before.
Do you think there's a riveting thing in our future, and what might that be?
Well, to be honest, I think going to the moon, while it will get some interest back, I would expect that going to the moon is going to be, there's going to be a commercial aspect to it, which there wasn't back then. The thing that will rivet uh, our country's attention and the world's attention is that first attempt to go to Mars. Uh, the moon will certainly refocus people on space, but not like it did at the beginning. Yeah, just you can go back and certainly I'm sure Christopher Columbus, he was the first, and the people in Europe, were really, who, when they heard about it, were really focused, interesting, but the voyages of other explorers afterward probably didn't get nearly the attention that Christopher Columbus did.
Yeah, it's also kind of interesting to think back whenever Christopher Columbus came over about 500 years ago, uh, all the turmoil and political unrest going on in Europe at that time. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about that during the year prior to Apollo 11 going to the moon was a time of great unrest in this country, 1968. And, that really, between the uh, uh, assassinations of Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, unrest in minority communities in the country. It was a very difficult time. Probably in my lifetime, the most difficult time prior to the time that we're going through right now. And so I guess to some extent, going to the moon was something that allowed people to focus on something else, something that people had dreamed about, for, I guess, ever since the first people looked up and saw the moon there. And so, it's there's some parallels, but indeed there will always be stuff to distract. I'm sure that once we go back to the moon, once we're there, it will just be another thing going on to most people.
yeah, I've done about 260 interviews so far,
Wow.
and of them, only about 50 of them knew that we're planning to go to the moon in 2024.
Uh-huh. That's something that, I'm certainly aware of because, as I say, I grew up with going into space as being the biggest, the newest frontier. And so I've always been interested. Recognize now that, yeah, I'm not going. There's no chance I'll ever be going. I'm a little beyond that now.
I was listening to a speaker at ISTC in 2016. It was a recording. I saw it recently, and he was saying, if you ever wonder why people who have like so much, everything going for them, and they're so grumpy, is because we're from the generation that was all supposed to be in space and we're not there. So
As I said, I was sure when I was a kid growing up that I would travel in space someday. In fact, I remember uh, always in school when we had to do a project, whether it was science, whatever, and we had to create something. I mean, I remember the posters about space. I kept a space scrapbook, cut out articles from the newspaper, put it in there. I remember drawing some pictures, not that I was very good at drawing pictures. So yeah, it was a part of the fabric. Uh, it won't ever be like that again. Uh, Although it'll be exciting to go back.
now, I feel like the 2020s are going to be to space exploration what the 1990s were to internet and the computer. And I was wondering if you thought that was a fair analogy or how you think it might work out.
Well, I think um, unlike what the 90s were to the computer, people in the 20s going into space will be something of interest, something that they follow, but unlike the computer, it won't be something that they will at least see on a daily basis the effect on their lives. They won't be hands-on like, in the 90s when everybody who didn't have a computer was getting a computer and starting every day to have their hands on their computer. So, uh, it's going to be different. We have so much more, so many more diversions and things to be interested in now that again, I don't think it's going to grab people like the initial, basically the initial 10 years did, or initial 15 years did. Um, I think it will end up, in a sense, being much more commercial. It's going to be about what, especially with the moon, what resources there might be there that we can use. Uh, Unfortunately, it will also be about defense. It becomes kind of the high ground that the U.S., that China, and right now, not sure who else, you know, Russia, want to control, want to make sure that if there are resources there, they've got them rather than someone else, and that uh, they have also whatever benefit from a defense and domination standpoint there are. So, you know, not nearly as uh, what's the word I'm not nearly as romantic of a thing as back then. I mean, back then it was exploration. It was something new. It was going where men never had been before, and so it's going to be different for the public.
Um, but I guess one thing I was thinking about from sort of like an investment and development standpoint, it really feels like there's a lot of opportunity for the private sector to create companies. And, you know,
Oh,
Jeff Bezos likes to talk about how whenever he started Amazon, everyone, for the fact didn't have the internet and the credit card payment system and the shipping system, they couldn't start Amazon. And he kind of
mm-hmm.
sees it as his job to put that same infrastructure in for space so that other entrepreneurs can.
Oh, of course. I mean, look, Elon Musk, him and SpaceX, they're already probably the most visible commercial entity in space because of their recent successful launch. There are many other companies. I mean, even even during the 60s and the attempt to land on the moon, while everything was under the auspices of NASA, the government, uh, you had all kind of private companies who, the launch vehicles, the spacecraft, the communication stuff, everything, was developed uh, by companies working with the government. And, you're going to have that. But I think the companies, the commercial aspect is going to be a more visible, well-known part of it, which in a way takes away a little bit of the romance of it. compared to then. But yeah, there's certainly will be opportunities both for companies as well as for investors. So,
And in terms of, I mean, one of the things that NASA likes to tout about us going back to the moon is it will inspire people. And, you know, in our way of currently getting news, it's very easy for people who are into space to be kind of flooded with space news and everybody else to not see anything related to it. And so I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on how can it inspire people if people don't know about it? And then how could you get them to know about it?
well, yeah, in fact, I mean, that all kind of folds in with the way we get our news now compared to the way we did back in the 60s and 70s. In the 60s and 70s, you know, most people got their national news. Uh, they read a newspaper and they tuned into one of the three network nightly 30-minute newscasts. Everybody was getting news from pretty much the same couple of sources. Now, indeed, you know, excuse me, everybody gets, you know, goes to a different set of uh, cable channels, podcasts, many different channels, all of which tend to have, you know, one angle, philosophy, outlook as another. But I think that maybe not so much with the the moon phase of the next phase of away from the Earth flight, but when, you know, it begins to be that what we're doing on the moon is the jumping off to Mars, that when there's going to be missions to Mars, when there's going to be the prospect of missions to Mars, that's when that's if that doesn't get the attention of people, not just here, but around the world, then our whole spirit of adventure and exploration means it's gone.
Um, and do you think that trip to Mars will be like an international endeavor?
You would hope that it would be. Uh, I wish I could be uh, so optimistic. I mean, the trip to Mars is going to take an enormous uh, price financially to do. I mean, the trip to Mars is going to basically be, I guess, 2 years, you know, to there and back, hopefully and back. Uh, and because you will have a group of astronauts, you know, whether it, probably it's more than three, you know, let's say you got a group of 10 on the crew going there. They're going to be living together in awful close quarters for a long time. And, you know, does that lend itself as much to an international effort, or does it lend itself more to a single country effort where the crew comes from a relatively the same culture so that they can get along for 2 years? Uh, you know, that's a good question. I'm not a psychologist, and I can't tell you for sure.
Of course, some of the most dramatic and long-lasting conflicts in our history have been between brothers.
True. Well, that's a good point. And yeah, and you don't want to, but then again, you don't want to have Hatfields and McCoys on the same spacecraft either. uh, I think that uh, once we establish a permanent presence on the moon, it's going to be many decades until uh, all of the myriad of issues to go to Mars can be uh, can be planned and made to actually happen. So certainly it won't be me that'll be around to see that. It won't probably won't be my children either. Uh, so
Um, so whenever you think of the future, like 500 years from now, do you still see like humanity mainly on Earth, just making like these little trips to places, or do you really think?
no, I really think that because of the issues of the resources on Earth, I mean, we're going to, unless as a civilization come together to do something about uh, climate change that is induced by human activity. Um, I think that a couple of hundred years from now, whether we can survive, whether the earth will provide the resources that are needed, whether the atmosphere will still be temperate enough for us to live here. Uh, there will the moon as the nearest neighbor be seen as a place maybe to go for survival, but it will be a different kind of life because there is indeed no atmosphere that we can breathe up there. So I think it will be clearly be seen as a place of refuge for those who have the means, the connections, to be one of the people who can get there. I'm not overly optimistic about our ability to sustain life as we know it on this planet uh, for a long time. Although supposedly we've been here for a couple of million years, and hard to tell. I'm not too concerned for myself. I think that the planet will sustain people for at least another 30 years if I should be so fortunate as to live to 100. So
I always wondered about that, survival messing up Earth to the point where we need to go to space. And as far as I know, there's no place in space that humans could just live out in the open. Every place is very hostile.
right,
And
right. Well, that's what I was saying before. The moon may be a place where when Earth becomes uninhabitable, it could go, but it's going to require an artificial environment to live in. But much like the space station, the International Space Station, it couldn't live up there without uh, the oxygen in the space station. Well, on the moon, you're going to need permanent uh, environment and an enclosed, hermetically sealed, if you will, environment to live in. This is the only known place that we can live in the natural environment. And I guess Mars is the closest place that there's a question that maybe, maybe there's water, maybe there's not. Uh, I don't think uh, it will be it will be hundreds of years, if ever, that Star Trek, where people are traveling through space, going to different places where there's life. Uh, I don't see that.
I guess the challenge for me is you'll have to create these hermetically sealed environments on the moon. Why not just create them on Earth itself?
That's I never really thought of that, but you know, indeed that may have to happen. Uh, and hopeful, of course, by the time that has to happen, uh, I think the problems will have been so great. By that time, probably the change in our environment may have wiped out a significant portion of the people living here. Uh, I guess I've always looked at space as a place to go, to explore, to potentially live in or you know, be at for whatever purpose for extended periods of time. Never have thought about space as where, going there to survive what might happen here on Earth. I guess that's a newfound awareness uh, during the more recent years of my life, and I just haven't really considered that too much in the context of space.
Yeah,
Uh,
I keep thinking that the natural challenges of space are harder than it will ever be on Earth, but I can see people going to space just to get away from the challenges of their fellow human. It's like,
yeah, and I also can see, because Earth is where we are, uh, just like people from here might want to go to Asia because it's somewhere different, or go to Europe or whatever. Certainly, there will be space tourism. Uh, if there is a permanent settlement on the moon that includes people who are living there because they want to live there. People will want to go there and see it and live it for a while, and then come back to the trees and the rivers and the snow, and so yeah, it's there will be that when there's uh, uh, permanent settlements somewhere else, and that's most likely the moon.
and if you had to like put a range on when you think was the most likely time that first settlement was actually developed, what's your feeling?
Well, it's actually not that far away. If we do get back to the moon in the mid uh, 2020s, just uh, because I believe that one of the big things on the moon is the resources. Well, if you've got people going up there to uh, capture the resources, whether it's through mining them or what have you, they're not going to be able to just go up, for 2 days and do that and come back with the resources. There will begin to be long-term, kind of permanent settlements. People may not be there permanently at first, but my guess is that by some time in the early to mid 2030s, uh, you would have uh, people, there would be permanent residency on the moon, even if people do not individually become permanent residents. So, and as soon as it becomes defense related, some of my friends who have spent, a couple of years in Europe, thanks to the U.S. government, they may have their, 1 year tour on the moon. So, yeah, I don't think that's that far off. And when people are there, for instance, for a year working on the resources or as defense, whatever, sometimes they're going to want families. And you may start to have, people who are residing there. So I don't think that's that far off. I mean, I'm hopeful I may see that, although I probably won't be one of those people.
Now, if space travel, if going to space was safe and affordable, would you reconsider? Would you?
I'd go tomorrow.
You go tomorrow.
I would go tomorrow. Uh, and I look at the Virgin's attempt to have you know uh, spacecraft that people can fly in space, and if I had accumulated a few more bucks, a lot few more bucks, the price tag is something I would be on the waiting list. But it's right now, yeah, it's just uh, beyond the possibility, unless you told me at the end of this interview that you're going to fund me to become one of the first space tourists, and then I'm there.
I wish I could do that. That would be great.
Yeah, I wish you could too.
But I mean, Blue Origin and their New Shepard, a vehicle that nobody's mentioned anything about price there. There's potential that could be quite a bit cheaper.
Yeah, still though, yeah, it's not going to be within my price range. You know, the it's just the economics of it. Just I know enough about the economics of the stuff to know that it's not within my price range. But yes, if financially I could, uh, and the opportunity were there, I would go, because it was always, I would even say, it wasn't as much a dream as it was just something I expected. And, always, you don't lose the desire to do the things that as a young person you wanted to do. So,
They just kind of go to sleep and wake up occasionally.
yeah, you know what? It's there every time that there's been a manned space launch, and I see it on TV, or I see something broadcast from the International Space Station. It's there. Just always wanted to do it. In fact, one of the things that I did, I always wanted to do that, and I said, that kind of made me want to learn to fly. And when I was younger, I did learn how to fly. Uh, and then when my wife said to me, look, you've either got to decide whether to feed your flying habit or feed the kids, I kind of didn't have a choice. But, that was really all part of the same dream, looking up. So.
Well, Bruce, I really appreciate your time and insight.
Well, I think what you're doing here is just great. You must get to talk to an awful lot of interesting people because, of course, people who are interested in space tend to be interesting people because they're not just earthbound in their thoughts.
Yeah, and I talked to a lot of non-space people also. My original thought on this project was I work from home, which I was
Right?
doing before everybody was working from home. Uh,
Okay.
and so in December, I got this idea of interviewing a person a day, like at a coffee shop or at the mall or what have you, just a random person, and
Hmm.
asking them about their thoughts
Yeah.
in space and what have you. And since the whole COVID-19 lockdown, I've had to do everything virtually. So
Right. Right. Well, this also allows you to reach out and have people reach toward you who do have some interest in the topic. Because I'm sure doing it in a coffee shop, coming up to someone and say, gee, I'd like to talk to you about your thoughts on going to the moon. They probably look at you and say, I think I'm going to move to another seat here. This guy is.
yeah, I have no trouble getting seats at the coffee shop now.
Oh, well, I'm glad that I had a chance to do this because, as I say, this is something that's I've just always been interested in. And when you have access to a seat on one of these space tourist launches, and if you can't use it, I'll be glad to fill in for you.
It's a deal.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Nathan. And it's funny. I saw about your project and I went on and signed up for it. Are you putting online all of your interviews?
Yes, on countdowntothemoon.org. They're
Okay.
all listed there,
Oh,
unedited,
okay.
and then
I,
we kind of put them, create some highlight videos from time to time. Uh,
okay.
so
I'll have to do that. 'Cause, it's several months ago that I found out about your project and signed up. And, I'll admit it has not been top of mind every day to go back and find out, what you're doing. But now it's top of mind again and it's time to look at it. And good luck to you. And I hope that uh, you only have to do this for another, 4 years or 3.5 years, because then we'll be back to the moon.
I hope we're back. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, have a good day
Okay.
and here on Earth. And I appreciate having this chance.
Thank you so much, Bruce.
Okay.
Bye.
Take care. Bye bye.